Quote, October 31st, was sensible of my barrenness and decays in the things of God. My soul failed when I remembered the fervency which I had enjoyed at the throne of grace. Oh, I thought, if I could be but spiritual, warm, heavenly-minded, and affectionately breathing after God, this would be better than life to me. My soul longed exceedingly for death, to be loosed from this dullness and barrenness and made forever active in the service of God. I seemed to live for nothing and to do no good. And oh, the burdens of such a life. O death, death, my kind friend, hasten and deliver me from dull mortality, and make me spiritual and vigorous to eternity. November 1st. Had but little sweetness in divine things, but afterwards in the evening felt some life and longings after God. I longed to be always solemn, devout, and heavenly minded, and was not afraid to leave off praying, lest I should again lose the sense of the sweet things of God. November 2nd. Was filled with sorrow and confusion in the morning, and could enjoy no sweet sense of divine things, nor get any relief in prayer. So I deserved that every one of God's creatures should be let loose to be the executioners of his wrath against me, and yet therein saw I deserved what I did not fear as my portion. After noon, rode up to the Indians, and while going, could feel no desires for them, and even dreaded to say anything to them. But God was pleased to give me some freedom and enlargement, and made the season comfortable to me. In the evening, had enlargement in prayer. But alas, what comforts and enlargements I have felt for these many weeks past have been only transient and short, and the greater part of my time have been filled up with deadness, with struggles with deadness, and bitter conflicts with corruption. I have found myself exercised sorely with some particular things that I thought myself most of all freed from, and thus I have ever found it, when I have thought the battle was over, and the conquest gained, and so let down my watch, the enemy has risen up and done me the greatest injury. November 3rd. I read the life and trials of a godly man, and was much warmed by it. I wondered at my past deadness, and was more convinced of it than ever. Was enabled to confess and bewail my sin before God with self-abhorrency. Lord's Day, November 4th. Had, I think, some exercise of faith and prayer in the morning. Longed to be spiritual. Had considerable help in preaching to my poor Indians. Was engaged with them, and hoped that God designed mercy for them. Unquote. The Memoirs of David Brainerd, written by Jonathan Edwards, being read by Peter John Parisi, also known as Brian Dean. More free audiobooks and chapters can be found on www.intheschoolofprayer.com. We're going to be reading this book and breaking up the chapters into sections if they're long. This is chapter 6. In July last, I heard a number of Indians presiding at a place called Ka-Ke-Si-Sa Chong, more than 30 miles westward from the place where I usually preached. I visited them, found about 30 persons, and proposed my desire of preaching to them. They readily complied, and I preached to them only twice, they being just then removing from this place, where they only lived for the present, to Susquehanna River, where they belonged. While I was preaching, they appeared sober and attentive, and were somewhat surprised, having never before heard of these things. There were 2 or 3 who suspected that I had some ill design upon them, and urged that the white people had abused them, and taken their lands from them, and therefore they had no reason to think that they were now concerned for their happiness, but on the contrary, that they designed to make them slaves, or get them on board their vessels and make them fight with the people over the water, as they expressed it, meaning the French and Spaniards. However, the most of them appeared very friendly, and told me they were then going directly home to Susquehanna, and desired I would make them a visit there and manifest a considerable desire of further instruction. This invitation gave me some encouragement in my great work, and made me hope that God designed to open an effectual door to me for spreading the gospel among the poor heathen further westward. In the beginning of October last, with the advice and direction of the correspondents for the Indian Mission, I undertook a journey to Susquehanna, and after 3 days' tedious travel, 2 of them through a wilderness almost impassable by reason of mountains and rocks, and 2 nights lodging in the open wilderness, I came to an Indian settlement on the side of the Susquehanna's river called Opi Hal Hong Pong, where were 12 Indian houses, and, as nigh as I could learn, about 70 souls, old and young, belonging to them. Here also, soon after my arrival, I visited the king, addressing him with expressions of kindness, and after a few words of friendship, informed him of my desire to teach them the knowledge of Christianity. He hesitated not long before he told me that he was willing to hear. I then preached and continued there several days, preaching every day as long as the Indians were at home, and they, in order to hear me, deferred the design of their general hunting, which they were just then entering upon, for the space of 3 or 4 days. The men, I think universally, except one, attended my preaching. Only the women, supposing the affair we were upon was of a public nature, belonging only to the men, and not what every individual person should concern himself with, could not readily be persuaded to come and hear. But after much pains used with them for that purpose, some few ventured to come and stand at a distance. When I had preached to the Indians several times, some of them, very frankly, proposed what they had to object against Christianity, and so gave me a fair opportunity for using my best endeavors to remove from their minds those scruples and jealousies they labored under. And when I had endeavored to answer their objections, some appeared much satisfied. I then asked the king if he was willing I should visit and preach to them again, if I should live to the next spring. He replied he should be heartily willing for his own part, and added he wished the young people would learn, etc. I then put the same question to the rest. Some answered they would be very glad, and none manifested any dislike to it. There were sundry other things in their behavior, which appeared with a comfortable and encouraging aspect, that upon the whole I could not but rejoice. I had taken that journey among them, although it was attended with many difficulties and hardships. The method I used with them, and the instructions I gave them, I am persuaded were means, in some measures, to remove their heathenish jealousies and prejudices against Christianity, and I could not but hope that God of all grace was preparing their minds to receive, quote, the truth as it is in Jesus, unquote. If this may be the happy consequence, I shall not only rejoice in my past labors and fatigues, but shall, I trust also, be willing to spend and be spent, if I may thereby be instrumental, to turn them from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan to God. Thus, sir, I have given you a faithful account of what has been most considerable respecting my mission among the Indians, in which I have studied all convenient brevity. I shall only now take leave to add a word or two respecting the difficulties that attend the Christianizing of these poor pagans. In the first place, their minds are filled with prejudices against Christianity, on account of the vicious lives and unchristian behavior of some that are called Christians. These not only set before them the worst examples, but some of them take pains expressively in words to dissuade them from becoming Christians, foreseeing that if they should be converted to God, the hope of their unlawful gain would thereby be lost. Again, these poor heathens are extremely attached to the customs, traditions, and fabulous notions of their fathers. This one seems to be the foundation of all their other notions, via that it was not the same God made them who made the white people, but another, who commanded them to live by hunting, etc., and not to conform to the customs of the white people. Hence, when they are desired to become Christians, they are frequently reply that, quote, they will live as their fathers lived, and go to their fathers when they die, unquote. And if the miracles of Christ and his apostles be mentioned to prove the truth of Christianity, they also mention sundry miracles which their fathers have told them were anciently wrought among the Indians, and which Satan makes them believe were so. They are much attached to idolatry, frequently making feasts which they eat in honor to some unknown beings, who, they suppose, speak to them in dreams, promising them success in hunting and other affairs, in case they will sacrifice to them. They oftentimes also offer their sacrifices to the spirits of the dead, who they suppose stand in need of favors from the living, and yet are in such a state as that they can well reward all the offices of kindness that are showed them. And they impute all their calamities to the negligence of these sacrifices. Furthermore, they are much awed by those among themselves who are called powwows, who are supposed to have a power of enchanting or poisoning them to death, or at least in a very distressing manner. And they apprehended it would be their sad fate to be thus enchanted, in case they should become Christians. Lastly, the manner of their living is likewise a great disadvantage to the design of their being Christianized. They are almost continually roving from place to place, and it is but rare that an opportunity can be had with some of them for their instruction. There is scarce any time of the year wherein the men can be found generally at home, except about 6 weeks before, and in the season of planting their corn, and about 2 months in the latter part of the summer, from the time they begin to roast their corn until it is fit to gather in. As to the hardships that necessarily attend a mission among them, the fatigues of frequent journeying in the wilderness, the unpleasantness of a mean and hard way of living, and the great difficulty of addressing a people of a strange language, these I shall at present pass over in silence, designing that I have already set a difficulty attending this work, not for the discouragement of any, but rather for the incitement of all who, quote, love the appearing of the kingdom of Christ, unquote, to frequent the throne of grace with earnest supplications that the heathen, who were anciently promised to Christ for his inheritance, may now actually and speedily be brought into his kingdom of grace and made heirs of immortal glory. I am yours, sir, your obedient, humble servant, David Brainerd, unquote. The same day, November 5th, he set out on a journey to New York to the meeting of the presbytery there, and was from home more than a fortnight. He seemed to enter on this journey with great reluctancy, fearing that the diversions of it would prove a means of cooling his religious affections, as he had found in other journeys. Yet in this journey he had some special seasons, wherein he enjoyed extraordinary evidences and fruits of God's gracious presence. He was greatly fatigued and exposed to cold and storms, and when he returned from New York to New Jersey on Friday, was taken very ill and was detained by his illness some time. Quote, November 21st, rode from Newark to Rock Sidicus in the cold and was almost overcome with it. Enjoyed some sweetness in conversation with dear Mr. Jones while I dined with him. My soul loves the people of God, and especially the ministers of Jesus Christ, who feel the same trials that I do. November 22nd, came on my way from Rock Sidicus to the Delaware. Was very much disordered with a cold and pain in my head. About 6 at night, I lost my way in the wilderness and wandered over rocks and mountains, down hideous steeps, through swamps and most dreadful and dangerous places. And the night being dark, so that few stars could be seen, I was greatly exposed. I was much pinched with cold and distressed with an extreme pain in my head, attended with sickness at my stomach, so that every step I took was distressing to me. I had little hope for several hours together, but that I must lie out in the woods all night in this distressing case. But about 9 o'clock I found a house through the abundant goodness of God, and was kindly entertained. Thus I have frequently been exposed, and sometimes laid out the whole night. But God has hitherto preserved me, and blessed be his name. Such fatigues and hardships as these serve to wean me from the earth, and I trust will make heaven the sweeter. Formerly, when I was thus exposed to colds, rain, etc., I was ready to please myself with the thoughts of enjoying a comfortable house, a warm fire, and other outward comforts. But now these have less place in my heart through the grace of God, and my eye is more to God for comfort. In this world I expect tribulation, and it does not now, as formerly, appear strange to me. I do not in such seasons of difficulty flatter myself that it will be better hereafter, but rather think how much worse it might be, how much greater trials others of God's children have endured, and how much greater are yet perhaps reserved for me. Blessed be God that he makes the thoughts of my journey's end and of my dissolution and a great comfort to me under my sharpest trials, and scarce ever lets these thoughts be attended with terror or melancholy, but they are attended frequently with great joy. November 23rd, visited a sick man, discoursed and prayed with him, then visited another house where one was dead and laid out, looked on the corpse, and longed that my time might come to depart, that I might be with Christ. Then went home to my lodgings about 1 o'clock. Felt poorly, but was able to read most of the afternoon, unquote. Within the space of the next 12 days, he passed under many changes in the frames and exercises of his mind. He had many seasons of the special influences of God's Spirit, animating, invigorating, and comforting him in the ways of God and the duties of religion, but had some turns of great dejection and melancholy. He spent much time within this space in hard labor, with others, to make for himself a little cottage or hut to live in by himself through the winter. Yet he frequently preached to the Indians, and speaks of special assistance which he had from time to time in addressing himself to them, and of his sometimes having considerable encouragement from the attention which they gave. But on Tuesday, December 4th, he was sunk into great discouragement to see most of them going in company to an idolatrous feast and dance, after he had taken abundant pains to dissuade them from these things. Quote, December 6th, having now a happy opportunity of being retired in a house of my own, which I have lately procured and moved into, considering that it is now a long time since I have been able, either on account of bodily weakness or for want of retirement, or some other difficulty, to spend any time in secret fasting and prayer, considering also the greatness of my work, the extreme difficulties that attend it, and that my poor Indians are now worshipping devils, notwithstanding all the pains I have taken with them, which almost overwhelms my spirit. Moreover, considering my extreme barrenness, spiritual deadness, and dejection of late, as also the power of some particular corruptions, I set apart this day for secret prayer and fasting, to employ the blessing of God on myself, on my poor people, on my friends, and on the Church of God. At first I felt a great backwardness to the duties of the day, on account of the seeming impossibility of performing them, but the Lord helped me to break through this difficulty. God was pleased by the use of means to give me some clear conviction of my sinfulness and the discovery of the plague of my own heart, more affecting than what I have of late had. And especially I saw my sinfulness in this, that when God had withdrawn himself, then, instead of living and dying in pursuit of him, I have been disposed to one of these two things, either first to yield an unbecoming respect to some earthly objects, as if happiness were to be derived from them, or, secondly, to be secretly forward and impatient, and unsuitably desirous of death, so that I have sometimes thought I could not bear to think that my life must be lengthened out. That which often drove me to this impatient desire of death was a despair of doing any good thing in life, and I chose death rather than a life spent for nothing. But now God made me sensible of my sin in these things, and enabled me to cry to him for forgiveness. Yet this was not all which I wanted, for my soul appeared exceedingly polluted. My heart seemed like a nest of vipers, or a cage of unclean and hateful birds, and therefore I wanted to be purified, quote, by the blood of sprinkling that cleanses from all sin, end quote. This, I hope, I was enabled to pray for in faith. I enjoyed much more intenseness, fervency, and spirituality than I expected. God was better to me than my fears. Towards night I felt my soul rejoice that God is unchangeably happy and glorious, and that he will be glorified, whatever becomes of his creatures. I was enabled to persevere in prayer until sometime in the evening, at which time I saw so much need of divine help in every respect that I knew not how to leave off, and had forgot that I needed food. This evening I was much assisted in meditating on Isaiah chapter 52, verse 3. For thus saith the Lord, Ye have sold yourselves for naught, etc. Blessed be the Lord for any help in the past day. December 7th. Spent some time in prayer in the morning. Enjoyed some freedom and affection in the duty, and had longing desires of being made faithful to the death. Spent a little time in writing on a divine subject, then visited the Indians and preached to them, but under inexpressible dejection. I had no heart to speak to them and could not do it, but as I forced myself, I knew they must hate to hear me, as having but just got home from their idolatrous feast and devil-worshipping. In the evening, had some freedom in prayer and meditation. December 8th. Had been uncommonly free this day from dejection and from that distressing apprehension that I could do nothing. Was enabled to pray and study with some comfort, and especially was assisted in writing on a divine subject. In the evening, my soul rejoiced in God, and I blessed His name for shining on my soul. Oh, the sweet and blessed change I then felt when God, quote, brought me out of darkness into His marvelous light, unquote. Lord's Day, December 9th. Preached both parts of the day at a place called Greenwich in New Jersey, about 10 miles from my own house. In the first discourse, I had scarce any warmth or affectionate longing for souls. In the intermediate season, I got alone among the bushes and cried to God for pardon of my deadness, and was in anguish and bitterness that I could not address souls with more compassion and tender affection. I judged and condemned myself for want of this divine temper, though I saw I could not get it as of myself any more than I could make a world. In the latter exercise, blessed be the Lord, I had some fervency, both in prayer and preaching, and especially in the application of my discourse. I was enabled to address precious souls with affection, concern, tenderness, and importunity. The Spirit of God, I think, was there, as the effects were apparent, tears running down my cheeks. December 10th, near noon, I preached again. God gave me some assistance and enabled me to be in some degree faithful, so that I had peace in my own soul and a very comfortable composure, quote, although Israel should not be gathered, unquote. Came away from Greenwich and rode home. Arrived just in the evening. By the way, my soul blessed God for His goodness, and I rejoice that so much of my work was done, and I so much nearer my blessed reward. Blessed be God for grace to be faithful. December the 11th. Felt very poorly in body, being much tired and worn out the last night. Was assisted in some measure in writing on a divine subject, but was so feeble and sore in my breast that I had not much resolution in my work. Oh, how I long for that world where the weary are at rest. And yet, through the goodness of God, I do not now feel impatient. December 12th. Was again very weak, but somewhat assisted in the secret prayer, and enabled with pleasure and sweetness to cry, Come, Lord Jesus, come. Lord Jesus, come quickly. My soul longed for God, for the living God. Oh, how delightful it is to pray under such sweet influences. Oh, how much better is this than one's necessary food. I had at this time no disposition to eat, though late in the morning, for earthly food appeared wholly tasteless. Oh, how much better is thy love than wine, than the sweetest wine. I visited and preached to the Indians in the afternoon, but under much dejection. Found my interpreter under some concern for his soul, which was some comfort to me, and yet filled me with new care. I longed greatly for his conversion, lifted up my heart to God for it while I was talking to him, came home and poured out my soul to God for him, enjoyed some freedom in prayer, and was enabled, I think, to leave all with God. December 13th. Endeavored to spend the day in fasting and prayer, to employ the divine blessing, more especially on my poor people, and in particular I sought for converting grace for my interpreter, and 3 or 4 more under some concern for their souls. I was much disordered in the morning when I arose, but having determined to spend the day in this manner, I attempted it. some freedom I had in pleading for these poor concerning souls several times, and when interceding for them, I enjoyed greater freedom from wandering and distracting thoughts than in any part of my supplications. But in the general I was greatly exercised with wandering, so that in the evening it seemed as if I had need to pray for nothing so much as for the pardon of sins committed in the day past, and the vileness I then found in myself. The sins I had most sense of were pride and wandering thoughts, whereby I mocked God. The former of these cursed iniquities excited me to think of writing, preaching, or converting heathens, or performing some other great work, that my name might live when I should be dead. My soul was in anguish and ready to drop into despair, to find so much of that cursed temper. With this and the other evil I labored under, viz. Wandering thoughts, I was almost overwhelmed, and even ready to give over striving after a spirited devotion, and oft times sunk into a considerable degree of despondency, and thought I was more brutish than any man. Yet after all my sorrows, I trust through grace, this day and the exercise of it have been for my good, and taught me more of my corruption and weakness without Christ than I knew before. December 14th, near noon. Went to the Indians, but knew not what to say to them, and was ashamed to look them in the face. I felt that I had no power to address their consciences, and therefore had no boldness to say anything. Was much of the day in a great degree of despair about ever, quote, doing or seeing any good in the land of the living, unquote. He continued under the same dejection the next day. Quote, Lord's Day, December 16th. Was so overwhelmed with dejection that I knew not how to live. I longed for death exceedingly. My soul was sunk into deep waters, and the floods were ready to drown me. I was so much oppressed that my soul was in a kind of horror, could not keep my thoughts fixed in prayer for the space of 1 minute, without fluttering and distraction, and was exceedingly ashamed that I did not live to God. I had no distressing doubt about my own state, but would have cheerfully ventured, as long as I could possibly know, into eternity. While I was going to preach to the Indians, my soul was in anguish. I was so overborne with discouragement that I despaired of doing any good, and was driven to my wits' end. I knew nothing of what to say, nor what course to take. But at last I insisted on the evidence we have of the truth of Christianity from the miracles of Christ, many of which I set before them, and God helped me to make a close application to those who refused to believe the truth of what I taught them. Indeed, I was enabled to speak to the consciousness of all in some measure, and was somewhat encouraged to find that God enabled me to be faithful once more. Then came and preached to another company of them, but was very weary and faint. In the evening I was refreshed, and enabled to pray and praise God with composure and affection. Had some enlargement and courage with respect to my work. Was willing to live and long to do more for God than my weak state of body would admit of. Quote, I can do all things through Christ that strengtheneth me, unquote. And by His grace I am willing to be spent in His service, when I am not thus sunk in dejection and a kind of despair. December 17th. Was comfortable in mind most of the day. Was enabled to pray with some freedom, cheerfulness, composure, and devotion, and had also some assistance in writing on a divine subject. December 18th. Went to the Indians and discoursed to them near an hour, without any power to come close to their hearts. But at last I felt some fervency, and God helped me to speak with warmth. My interpreter also was amazingly assisted, and I doubt not but that, quote, the Spirit of God was upon him, unquote, though I had no reason to think he had any true and saving grace, but was only under conviction of his lost state. And presently upon this most of the grown persons were much affected, and the tears ran down their cheeks. One old man, I suppose 100 years old, was so much affected that he wept, and seemed convinced of the importance of what I taught them. I stayed with them a considerable time, exhorting and directing them, and came away, lifting up my heart to God in prayer and praise, and encouraged and exhorted my interpreter to strive to enter in at the strait gate. Came home and spent most of the evening in prayer and thanksgiving, and found myself much enlarged and quickened. Was greatly concerned that the Lord's work, which seemed to be begun, might be carried on with power to the conversion of poor souls and the glory of divine grace. December 19th. Spent a great part of the day in prayer to God for the outpouring of His Spirit on my poor people, also to bless His name for awakening my interpreter and some others and giving us some tokens of His presence yesterday. And blessed be God, I had much freedom 5 or 6 times in the day in prayer and praise, and felt a weighty concern upon my spirit for the salvation of these precious souls and the enlargement of the Redeemer's kingdom among them. My soul hoped in God for some success in my ministry, and blessed be His name for so much hope. December 20th. Was enabled to visit the throne of grace frequently this day, and through divine goodness enjoyed much freedom and fervency, sundry times, which much assisted in crying for mercy for my poor people, and felt cheerfulness and hope in my requests for them. I spent much of the day in writing, but was enabled to intermix prayer with my studies. December 21st. Was enabled again to pray with freedom, cheerfulness, and hope. God was pleased to make the duty comfortable and pleasant to me, so that I delighted to persevere and repeatedly to engage in it. Towards noon visited my people and spent the whole time in the way to them in prayer, longing to see the power of God among them, as there appeared something of it the last Tuesday. And I found it sweet to rest and hope in God. Preached to them twice, and at 2 distant places, had considerable freedom each time, and so had my interpreter. Several of them found me from one place to the other, and I thought there was some divine influence discernible among them. In the evening was assisted in prayer again. Blessed be the Lord, unquote. Very much the same things are expressed concerning his inward frame, exercises, and assistances on Saturday as on the preceding days. He observed that this was a comfortable week to him, but then concludes, quote, "Oh, that I had no reason to complain of much barrenness. Oh, that there were no vain thoughts and evil affections lodged within me. The Lord knows how I long for that world where they rest day nor night, saying, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty," unquote. On the following Sabbath, he speaks of assistance and freedom in his public work, but as having less of the sensible presence of God than frequently in the week past. But yet, says his soul was kept from sinking in discouragement. On Monday again, he seems to enjoy very much the same liberty and frequency through the day, which he enjoyed through the great part of the preceding week. This day, he wrote the following letter to one of his intimate friends, a clergyman in New Jersey. Quote, Forts of Delaware, December 24th, 1744. Reverend and dear brother, I have little to say to you about spiritual joys, and those blessed refreshments and divine consolations, with which I have been much favored in times past. But this I can tell you, that if I gain experience in no other point, yet I am sure I do in this, viz., that the present world has nothing in it to satisfy an immortal soul, and hence that it is not to be desired for itself, but only because God may be seen and served in it. I wish I could be more patient and willing to live in it for this end than I can usually find myself to be. It is no virtue, I know, to desire death, only to be freed from the misery of life. But I want that divine hope which you observed when I saw you last was the very sinew of vital religion. Earth can do us no good, and if there be no hope of our doing good on earth, how can we desire to live in it? Yet we ought to desire, or at least to be resigned to tarry in it, because it is the will of our all-wise sovereign. But perhaps these thoughts will appear melancholy and gloomy, and consequently will be very undesirable to you, and therefore I forbear to add, I wish you may not read them in the same circumstances in which I write them. I have a little more to do and suffer in a dark, disconsolate world, and then I hope to be as happy as you are. I should ask you to pray for me, were I worth your concern. May the Lord enable us both to endure hardship as good soldiers of Jesus Christ, and may we obtain mercy of God and be faithful to the death. In the discharge of our respectful trust, I am your very unworthy brother and humble servant, David Brainerd. December 25th. Enjoyed very little quiet sleep last night by reason of bodily weakness and closeness of my studies yesterday. Yet my heart was somewhat lively in prayer and praise. I was delighted with the divine glory and happiness, and rejoiced that God was God and that he was unchangeably possessed of glory and blessedness. Though God held my eyes waking, yet he helped me to improve my time, probably amongst my pains and weakness, in continued meditations on Luke chapter 13, verse 7. Behold, these 3 years I come seeking fruit, etc. My meditations were sweet, and I wanted to set before sinners their sin and danger, unquote. He continued in a very low state as to his bodily health for some days, which seemed to have been a great hindrance to him in his religious exercises and pursuits. But yet he expresses some degree of divine assistance from day to day through the remaining part of this week. He preached several times this week to his Indians, and there appeared still some concern among them for their souls. On Saturday he rode to the Irish settlement about 15 miles from his lodgings in order to spend the Sabbath there. Lord's Day, December 30th, discoursed both parts of the day from Mark chapter 8, verse 34. Whosoever will come after me, etc. God gave me very great freedom and clearness, and in the afternoon especially considerable warmth and fervency. In the evening also had very great clearness while conversing with friends on divine things. I do not remember ever to have had more clear apprehensions of religion in my life, but found a struggle in the evening with spiritual pride, unquote. On Monday he preached again in the same place with freedom and fervency, and rode home to his lodging, and arrived in the evening under a considerable degree of bodily illness, which continued the 2 next days, so that he complains much of spiritual emptiness and barrenness on those days. Quote, January 3rd, 1745. Being sensible of the great want of divine influence and the outpouring of God's Spirit, I spent this day in fasting and prayer, to seek so great a mercy for myself, my poor people in particular, and the Church of God in general. In the morning was very lifeless in prayer, and could give scarcely any sense of God. Near noon, enjoyed some sweet freedom to pray that the will of God might in every respect become mine, and I am persuaded it was so, that at that time in some good degree. In the afternoon I was exceedingly weak and could not enjoy much fervency in prayer, but felt a great degree of dejection, which I believe was very much owing to my bodily weakness and disorder. January 4th, rode up to the Indians near noon, spent some time under great disorder. My soul was sunk down into deep waters, and I was almost overcome with melancholy. January 5th, was able to do something at writing, but was much disordered with pain in my head. At night was distressed with the sense of my spiritual pollution, and 10,000 youthful, yea, and childish follies that nobody but myself had any thought about, all which appeared to me now fresh and a lively view, as if committed yesterday, and made my soul ashamed before God, and caused me to hate myself